Physical therapy is something that most people living with XLH have experience with at some point in their lives. I know that for me, I've had concerns while doing PT that the physical therapist I'm working with does not know about how my joints work and bones heal because of my XLH. Luckily, there is research that is informing how physical therapy can help people living with XLH to heal and to help physical function. I am proud to introduce our next speakers who will share more about this research. Dr. Carolyn Makika, one of the researchers, is an associate professor of medical sciences at the Yale University School of Medicine. Her research includes a focus on XLH and has provided a platform for us to better understand the management of physical manifestations of XLH. She is also chair of the XLH Network's Scientific Advisory Board and serves as an advisor for Quinnipiac University's National Organization for Rare Disorders, NORD, student chapter, and works with Rare Disease New England. Her co-researcher, Dr. Keith Stegbigel, is an orthopedic physical therapy practitioner and owner of a private practice in Connecticut. He has been involved in research and work with adults with XLH, informing exercise that is designed specifically to the needs and abilities of people living with XLH. They are joined by doctoral students Rebecca Fuchs and Casey Herzog, medical student Karthik Kanamala, and patient Robert Derimer.
So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Carolyn Masisa, and as in the introduction alluded to, I'm a faculty member not only at Yale, but at the Frank H. Netter MD School of Medicine at Quinnipiac University, where this study was conducted. Today, we're going to show you some of the data that was generated in a study called the Creation of an Evidence-Based Physical Therapy Program for Adults with XLH. And this was conducted in collaboration with my colleague, Dr. Keith Steigbigel, three absolutely amazing students for which this project serves as their theses projects, Rebecca Fuchs, Casey Herzog, and Karthik Kanamela. And we have a very, very special guest today, Robert Derimer, who was one of the participants in this particular study. So, the other thing I wanted to mention is that you'll see here that and the subtitle is a translational application of an interprofessional clinical study. And that's exactly what this is. So I'm going to first share with you some of the data that we generated in a study conducted at the School of Medicine. And in the first part of the talk, and that is an interprofessional clinical study that was conducted at Netter, in which we had an interprofessional team of occupational therapy, physical therapy, diagnostic imaging, social work, and medicine come together to study a cohort of patients, of adult patients with XLH, and it included sex and aged matched adults as controls. And the purpose of the study was to better understand the physical manifestations of adult XLH and the physical and functional impact that these manifestations have in the adult lifespan. So a major focus of my laboratory has been on the adult disorder of X-linked hypophosphatemia. I think I'm one of the few labs that focuses entirely on the adult disorder. And the data that you'll be seeing in the, some of the data that you'll be seeing today was recently published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism this past year. And I think there are copies available on the network. If not, you can contact me. So in my lab, we use both a mouse model and also conduct some clinical studies in the patient population. And certainly based on those data, what we found is that the two major comorbidities of adult X-linked hypophosphatemia are the formation of bone spurs or enthesophytes. And you'll see a pictorial of this of bone spurs or enthesophytes in the heel bone or the calcaneus here. We have calcification of the ligament insertion site. So this is where the ligament or or tendon inserts into the bone. And these are all connected to muscle, so that when you impact the calcification of a tendon insertion site, it can impact the ability of the muscle to properly function in the movement of the skeleton. The other comorbidity that we see in these patients and in the murine model, the mouse model, is degenerative arthritis or osteoarthritis. And this is very different from rheumatoid arthritis, which is an autoimmune inflammatory disorder. Instead, this is characterized by a complete loss of the cartilage, which forms that sort of cushion and a surface so that joints can move easily. And with time, that cartilage begins to erode away so that eventually you lose your cartilage. And that's called degenerative arthritis. You also have the formation of bone spurs. Those are called osteophytes on the margins of the joints with degenerative arthritis. So this is a very busy slide, and I'm not going to read through all of it, but the reason I'm showing it is that I want really to impress upon you in this study using diagnostic imaging or x-rays, the profound frequency and extent as to the numbers of thesophytes and osteophytes in degenerative arthritis that's manifested in the skeleton. So this is conducted again in this particular group. And some of the words that should be popping out to you are enthesophytes, degenerative arthritis, and osteophytes. And what we found is that these are all present in the spine, the shoulder girdle, the elbow, the wrist and hand, the pelvis, the hip joint, the knee and lower leg, and ankle and foot. So you can see there's quite an involvement of the entire skeleton, and often exclusively, it's also bilateral, meaning you'll see it in both arms, in both legs, and in both hips. So this is an example, just so you can kind of envision what we were looking at. Here's an example of a couple of x-rays. And here we have calcification of a ligament that inserts at the base of the skull. And also there's a ligament that runs the entire front of the spine. This is the cervical spine, or the spine that's at the neck. And these are completely calcified in this individual. So you can certainly ascertain from this that the movement of the head and neck will be very restricted in individuals who display this calcification. We also see similar calcifications in the hip or the pelvis region. You see calcification here and here and here. And so all of these are tendons and ligaments that, again, connect to large muscles that help us to move the pelvis as well as the lower extremities. So calcifications of these will limit or restrict mobility. They're also very painful. The other thing you can see in this picture is what we see as a complete degenerative arthritis. There's absolutely no cartilage present in this individual where you would normally have a cartilage space between. This is the femur or the leg, and then this is the joint that it fits into, the acetabulum. And so you can see there's no cartilage. What you also will recognize is that it's bilateral, meaning that it affects both sides of the body. Here are a couple more pictures if we move down a little bit. And again, these are just some examples. You can see here the kneecap or the patella is calcified at both at the patellar region, the quadriceps region, and the patellar region. And the other thing you'll see is calcifications here. This is the heel bone or the calcaneus. There are calcifications both at the tuberosity of the calcaneus or heel bone, and also at the plantar surface. There's a whole bunch of ligaments that exist on the dorsal side of the foot. And when these calcify, you would predictably get, again, restriction in the motion of the foot, and also the ability to kind of push off as you walk to create enough forces so that when you're walking that you can ambulate correctly. So if you put all of these things together, you might predict very well that there's an impact on the function within these individuals, the skeletal function. And in fact, that's one of the other things that we looked at in this particular study was range of motion and how they impacted certain activities of daily living. We're not going to share all of the activities of daily living in this particular talk, but they are in the paper. But the one thing I want to point out here is that, again, compared to controls, sex and age matched controls, we have p-values that are less than 0.5 for many of these. And all that means is when it's less than 0.05, that the populations are significantly different from each other. And so what we found in XLH is that these angles, these range of motion angles measured by goniometry, were significantly smaller or more restricted than the controls. And that is evidenced by all of the physical manifestations that you saw in the prior slides. So we look at now the functional impact of that's going to affect flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, and rotation of many of the joints that we'll be talking about today, or that we've looked at. So one of the major activities of daily living is ambulation or walking. And so we also conducted studies in a motion analysis lab, and those studies are conducted by putting a bunch of sensors on the patient, and then they walk and perform different tasks within a motion analysis lab. And all that information in 3 dimensions in all different planes is captured on the motion analysis software, and we're able to analyze that. So we get a lot of data from these particular studies, and I'm really just going to give you a couple of the big take homes from this particular study. So what we found was that we characterized the ambulation or the gait as an ataxic waddling gait. And so that's just sort of impaired movement of voluntary movements. And so the gait is abnormal when compared to our controls. And the word waddling is used because the other thing that we recognized in the analysis of the data, and you can actually see, is that often the patient will, or the individual in the study, sways the body back and forth, so to the right and the left, and it gives the appearance of waddling as they walk. So some of the findings that we have here is just sort of speaks to the velocity, how fast people can walk, the stride length, which is from the first position to the final position in this gait cycle. We saw that the step width and the step length are also less than 0.05, meaning that they're significantly different from the control population. So there's a lot of data where we actually analyze the upper body and the lower body, and in the impact it has on things like flexion and extension that I'm not going to share with you today, but they were all abnormal. And this is kind of a pictorial of the final sort of look of the of an individual with XLH, and that often because they have this cervical spine stenosis and calcification, that often they have to tuck the pelvis kind of inward so that they can attain a vertical gaze during ambulation. And then also we've determined that the pattern of gait and the speed of the gait is compromised in these patients. And so that actually helps us to better understand what some of the physical therapy interventions that can be had in these particular in this particular gait pattern. In addition to that, the patients also have a significant fear of falling, which was something that was also captured in the entire study. And so combining the fear of falling with the abnormal gait could be addressed by physical therapy. And so I'm going to conclude here with the slides and just say that the physical and functional limitations of XLH due to this progression in these musculoskeletal comorbidities, because they do progress and they do get worse over the lifespan, they all significantly impact activities of daily living. They limit range of motion, and they also contribute to daily pain levels. We continue to learn much more about these comorbidities using the mouse model. And in fact, we're submitting a couple of papers. We actually just submitted one and we'll be submitting another one in the near future that speaks to the underlying cause and how we can potentially treat this going forward. And then finally, which is the crux of the second part of this talk, is that information from these exact studies, and that's the word we use, the word translated, have been translated into an evidence-based therapy intervention study to address the major physical and functional comorbidities of adult XLH. And at this point in the session, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Keith Steibigel.
Thank you, Dr. Masisa. So the subjects within this study, we have one adult male and one adult female. They were from our previous study. They're both participants. And the idea here was to, again, produce a clinically based sound prescription of physical therapy for this population to help best treat and allow them independently to manage their musculoskeletal comorbidities, such as what was previously mentioned, the lack of range of motion, which will affect their ADLs, the pain, which will also affect their functional movement patterns, all of which will affect their gait, their balance, and their just functional movements within the day, both within the house as well as within public. The idea here was to, again, help provide something that's been clinically tested and produce something that can be then individualized, but also produced on a wider scale so that these subjects and the participants and patients that need this can further benefit from it in the future. So who is this for? This is really for both the XLH patient as well as a practitioner. I know myself, I've heard many times, and I'm sure my colleagues have heard this, that the XLH patient has said, my physician, my PT, they just don't understand me. They don't understand my needs. They don't understand what I can do and what I cannot do. So this has been produced to help guide both the patient, the XLH population, as well as the practitioners who may be at a disadvantage of not truly understanding either both the disease and or how it affects the population patient. So we can produce something that has some clinically based sound subject matter that can be transferred over and then shown that it can be used in an independent manner with some guidance, then there'll be less apprehension, hopefully, from the practitioners to help provide and produce something that the patients can start to use independently, other than purely just pain medication and a slow, sometimes demise of their balance and function. And luckily, we did see some positive findings within the study that these amazing students will now present to you.
When talking to our patients, beginning our study, we wanted to get a better understanding of the limitations that they had in their daily life and what was most significant for them and what was most important to try to resolve. So some common themes that may pertain to you as well was that there was a major fear of falling due to falls in the past and anticipation of falling in the future. The patients experienced difficulty walking with a slower speed and difficulty walking on uneven surfaces such as grass or different things outdoors. There was difficulty climbing the stairs, both going up and going down due to their physical limitations. And they also expressed very low confidence in new situations, balance activities, and performing activities of daily living. Our physical therapy prescription was a total of a 12-week program. So first we started out in the first 8 weeks, we held 2 60-minute physical therapy sessions a week over Zoom with our patients. And then we had a home exercise program that was catered towards them based off of our 2 Zoom sessions that week that we asked them to complete one time on their own. Thus, they had a total of 3 physical therapy sessions a week, 2 over Zoom, 1 on their own. After the first 8 weeks, we then continued our program for another 4 weeks, this time without the coaching of the physical therapy students and Keith, and we provided the patients with 3 different home exercise programs that we asked them to complete 3 times a week during this 4-week period. However, each week we touched base with the patients, asked them their feedback, and continued to provide help during this time. So since our 12-week PT program, we wanted to assess the patients using both outcome measures that were subjective and objective in nature. So first, we wanted to document patients' progress at 4 different points throughout this study. First, we did it at week 0. So this was before the study began. We performed an initial evaluation with the patients, and then we did it after the 4-week period, so at the midpoint of the study. Week 9, which was the conclusion of that first 8 weeks. And then we also did it at the conclusion of the total 12 weeks, which we called the 4-week follow-up. Like I mentioned before, we did do several outcome measures in order to document our patients' progress. It was very important to us to include both subjective and objective outcome measures in nature. Subjective measures were, we had 2 self-report measures, the ABC scale and the LEFS, and these the patients filled out on their own, and then we also conducted weekly interviews. In addition to the subjective reports, we also did a bunch of objective outcome measures, such as the Berg balance test, the tug, the 5 times sit to stand, and range of motion measurements. The subjective measurements were given to the patients right at the beginning of the week, and then the objective measurements were taken during the Zoom physical therapy sessions. So just to provide a little bit of background, our 2 subjective measurements besides the weekly interviews were the lower extremity functional scale and the activity specific balance confidence scale, also known as LEFS and the ABC. So the LEFS basically is a self-report measure in which patients grade activities that they can do based on the strength and ability of their lower extremities, which is also called your legs. So these are all functional tasks such as like walking 2 blocks, trying to put on different pieces of clothing, getting out of bed. And then we also did the activities balance scale. So this was really important because we wanted to track the patient's ability with their confidence levels throughout this program to hopefully see improvement. So this is confidence with activities of daily living, such as getting in and out of a car, walking up and down stairs. So you grade your confidence with those activities on a scale of 0% to 100%. 0% being you're not confident at all, 100% being you're fully confident that you can complete that activity. In addition to the subjective measurements, we also had the objective ones. So this was the timed up and go test, the Berg balance scale, and the 5 times sit to stand. And in addition to these, we also had the range of motion measurements. For the timed up and go test, this was a test in which the patient would stand up from a chair, walk a total of 3 meters, turn around, and come and sit back down. A very functional task that most people do every single day. And this is mainly to assess a patient's fall risk, which was very important to us because the fear of falling was very prominent. In addition, we also performed the Berg balance scale. This is to assess the patient's balance based on functional everyday activities, such as moving from one chair to another, balancing on a piece of foam, and also making turns, making a 360-degree turn, looking over one shoulder, such as you do in a car. And then we also had the 5 times sit to stand test. This is when a patient gets up from a chair and sits back down 5 times in a row. So this is also a very functional activity in order to assess a patient's strength and balance and ability to perform functional tasks. So next we'll get into all of these subjective and objective measurements, and so you can see the patient's progress.
So here we have some of the results from these validated assessments. So on the x-axis, we have evaluation number, 0 indicating our first baseline evaluation, which was done prior to the initiation of the physical therapy program. And I'll go over each of these graphs with you. So overall, the trends in both participants showed increased gains in functional capacity, strength, balance, and confidence. So I'd like to direct your attention to the graph on the left, the tug time. So if you recall, the tug test is basically a test in which the participant will stand up from a seated position, walk a certain distance, turn around, walk back, and sit down again. So in our first participant, we measured that the tug time decreased over the course of the physical therapy program. Next, we have the Berg score. So the Berg score against tests balance. In this, we see another similar outcome where this participant was having increased ability to complete these tasks in the Berg test, which correlates with increased balance or better balance. Next, we have the lower extremity functional scale. So the LEFS, the third graph, is also showing overall an increase in functional capacity for the lower limbs. If you notice the time point, which is listed above the x-axis 0.2, so this is our third evaluation total. In this case, you can see that the LEFS score drops a little bit. So on this particular occasion, when we did this evaluation, the patient was having a quote unquote bad day. So this is common in many people with XLH. In this particular case, the patient was having lack of energy, and the patient noticed also that their right knee was bothering them. So because of that, the LEFS score dropped a little bit. And it's likely that during this particular evaluation, we caught them on a bad day. But overall, we can see that these score in the LEFS jumps back up, and overall we see a positive trend. Next, we have the ABC. So this is the activity specific balance confidence scale. This is confidence in completing tasks related to balance. And we see an increase, so increased confidence in balance and performing activities related to balancing. And then the last graph is the 5 times sit to stand. So in this test, the patient will stand up and sit down in a stationary chair 5 times, and we will measure the time taken to do that. And in this particular patient, the 5 times sit to stand test time decreased, which correlates with increased functional capacity to stand up and sit down in a stationary chair. Next, we'll move on to participant 2. So in participant 2, we see many of these same trends. So again, the x-axis is the evaluation number, and we see tug time decreasing. We see the Berg score increasing, increased balance, better balance. We see the LEFS score increasing. The ABC score, activity specific balance confidence score, increasing. And in this particular patient, they've almost reached the 100% mark, which indicates full functional balance. The final graph is the 5 times sit to stand test, which also shows a trend downward. So they're able to complete this task faster. We also measured range of motion through Zoom. So this diagram is basically to show what kinds of motions that we looked at. So I'd like to draw your attention to the first man on the left, man number 1. So from this side position, we did a couple different measurements of the upper and lower extremity. For the upper extremity, we focused on the shoulder joint. So for the shoulder joint, we looked at flexion. So shoulder flexion basically involves moving your hand or arm in front of you and raising it up over your head. Then we looked at the lower limb. So for lower limb, we looked at hip flexion. So hip flexion, as you can see here in man number 1, is basically kicking your leg out. So kicking your leg out is a measure of we use that to measure hip flexion. Next is knee flexion. So knee flexion is basically the motion involving bending your knee. Man number 2 shows a couple of measurements for the lumbar spine. So for the lumbar spine, we have flexion and extension. So flexion is basically bending forward and extension is bending backwards. Next, for man number 3, we have abduction, so abduction. Abduction involves taking your arm and bringing it up over your head sideways besides you. And then the last picture on the right shows the ankle joint. And in the ankle joint, we measured dorsiflexion. So dorsiflexion involves pointing your toes up, pointing your foot up towards the ceiling. And for the lower limb, we measured hip flexion, knee flexion, and dorsiflexion of the ankle by having the patient assume a squat position. So for these measurements for range of motion, we used goniometric measurements, which were done via screenshot, and preliminary results show increased range of motion. So one of the participants in our study was able to reach lower to the ground, which correlates with increased lumbar flexion. But it's more important that these increased range of motion measurements that we saw during the study were correlated well with the increased functional gains seen in the Tug Berg, the LEFS, the ABC, and the 5-time sit to stand tests.
So next we'll talk a little bit more about the actual PT study. So in order to do the physical therapy sessions, we gave each patient some equipment that they needed at home. Some of the equipment that is needed for us was the TheraBands that were provided to them, light dumbbells, something that could have been replicated also with an easy household kitchen item, a foam surface to try to represent an uneven surface. And then we also had a small stool and a long strap for some stretching exercises. It's really important that the equipment that we did, they were simple. We did give them to our patients, but we could use something at home as well. And they were able to be stored in any household we even had one of our patients make a nice little rack so that way he had everything all at one place. So a little bit about the physical therapy exercises that we kind of pulled from our study. These are some of the exercises that we found that were overall a good exercise for the patients with XLH. It's important that our exercises really focus on the functional movements that our patients wanted to improve in. So to kind of take you through a few of these, the balance progressions, we were progressed these balance exercises for each patient that was prescribed, and as they improved, the balance got harder. For hamstring strengthening and stretching, we wanted to make sure that we focus on this group so that way we could help improve the walk and their stride length as they were able to walk. For mini squats, this helped with working on their how to get up from a chair and also how to sit back down from a chair. So we started it with small squats, and then we were able to progress them to goblet squats onto a chair, as well as holding onto an object. For step ups, this was important for our participants because we wanted to focus on being able to do stairs as well as going on and off curbs. So this was an exercise that then could correlate to those functional activities. For heel raises, these we saw that if we improved with heel raises, we could have them reach up just a little bit higher when they're trying to get something higher from the upper cabinet. We also did some lateral band walks and standing doorway stretches for just some increasing stretching and strengthening And then for posture, we worked on scapular retractions, just trying to open up and really improve the strength of the muscles that help us with our everyday posture. It's important to recognize that our prescription for these patients were individualized based on the patient's needs and their goals of physical therapy. It's also important to realize that they were progressed for each patient at different levels, and in order to complete those needs for each patient. So next we'll kind of look at, we do have a few quick videos to kind of see, because we did do this through telehealth. So our sessions were all through Zoom, and we can kind of get a quick snapshot of what one of our patients looked like at the beginning and then at the end of our PT sessions. So if Marty doesn't mind playing the videos. So this first video, you'll see our patient, he's trying to balance on one leg on his initial evaluation. And we're talking back and forth with them because we want to be safe. And then if we see here, he's trying it on his other leg. And you can see he's unstable and he really has to use that other leg in order to help. And then we'll see our next video when it comes up. So now this is our next video where you can see that our patient was able to actually obtain a longer balance. He doesn't have to use that other leg anymore. And it's actually a fun fact that we were able to, he was able to hold that for a minute on each leg that day. And then we were able to use that blue foam surface in the back in order to kind of even make it harder. And he was able to do that. So it's important to notice that it can be done through telehealth. It also can be done to see improvements through a program if you stick to it. That, you know, PT did work, especially for balance in this patient. It's to be confident and to reassure that, you know, it was done safely, it was done supervised, this program. And if we were suggesting for you guys is to make sure that, really making sure that it's individualized to you, and you can do it at home, but wanting to make sure that if you're working with a PT, to just independently be able to do it in a safe manner. So then this is a little bit of that snapshot of our home exercise programs that we provided for our patient. You notice that we gave them, we would give them the exercises with an example in a picture that had the exact instructions on how often and how long we wanted them to complete that exercise. It's also important to note that these exercises were always done with the physical therapy students in a session prior to being prescribed for their home exercise program. So that way we made sure that they were correctly able to do it. And then this was just a reminder in case they forgot exact movements or how long they should be holding the exercise.
So each week we conducted an interview for both of our participants. We asked them a couple of questions about their experience and if they've noticed any changes during the program in terms of these different categories. So I'll just go and read some of these questions to you. So we asked them if they've noticed any changes, big or small, with respect to their strength, their balance, their range of motion, their energy. And lastly, was there any change in the frequency of taking their pain medications? So many people with XLH deal with chronic pain. So we wanted to ask if our physical therapy program was affecting that pain level at all. One of our participants noticed that they were taking their pain medications a little bit less frequently towards the end of the program. We also asked them a couple questions about, were they able to complete all the exercises on their own? Did they have any scheduling difficulties? How was it in terms of fitting their exercise program into their daily schedule? Then we asked if we provided enough information on how to perform exercises properly through Zoom, and if there was anything that we could do to help them understand how to do these exercises better and with proper form. Then we also welcomed any additional feedback. And then on the next slide, these are some of the answers that we received to these interview questions. And I'll just read off of them. So one patient said, "I feel more confident. I can do things I would have never attempted before." Another patient said, "My balance is much improved. I was gardening yesterday and was able to catch myself after tripping on uneven ground. My ability to walk has changed. I'm better on my feet and can change direction more easily. Although I still can't touch the ground, I can reach down lower. It also hurts less." So these are some actual quotations from our participants during the exercise program. And these were some of the major themes that we saw towards the end. And it's very reassuring to us that the physical therapy program has utility in this population. So here we have our mission statement. And while I have this slide up, I'm going to take this opportunity to introduce our special guest, Robert. He was one of the participants of this study, and we thank him immensely for taking part in this research. So I'm going to ask Robert a few questions just to give everyone a little insight into how this program was and his experience. So Robert, tell us, what were your most favorite exercises and why were these exercises your favorite?
I think a lot were the exercises for the get a little morning routine going. That way makes it a lot easier to start your day if you're feeling better when you first get up. And definitely the squats and the lateral walks, the four-way hip stretches, and working on that foam balance pad. Because balance has a lot to do with almost everything, I think.
That's great to hear. So how do you think others with XLH may benefit from this physical therapy program?
I'm going to help you try to be a little more active. And if you try a few things that you didn't do before, it also helps you, gain confidence and a little more, mental, kind of like a mental praise for yourself. And also with socializing, because you might feel better. Well, then when you're allowed to, you might go over a friend's house more and just do more things because you just feel better.
Great. And how was the whole experience of taking part in the study? And what are the biggest takeaways?
Well, for me, it was great that I'm more confident walking. I can go outside and do my gardening and not be afraid of sticks or rocks in the yard. And even just better balance, I can walk better as I can move in different ways that I didn't move before. And it's just been overall better feeling.
Great. Thank you, Robert, again, for joining us today and for sharing your insight.
Thank you.
So thank you for everybody today for their participation. And it was really, really nice to hear the students present their data. They worked very, very hard over the summer. And in the two individuals who enrolled in this particular study to see if in fact we could create something that can now be implemented. So these data will be collated and put together and published in a physical therapy journal so that we can give access to our findings to your own physical therapist. The other thing I wanted to point out as kind of a conclusion is the one thing we did learn from the study that was published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism, the foundation of this particular study, was that there was a lot, the physical findings that we had stood true for most of the patients between individuals, so that we would anticipate that a lot of the physical findings, because they are so reproducible from individual to individual, that the physical therapy program would also be very similar between patients, being careful to recognize that you would be working with a physical therapist using this knowledge set, but also performing the tasks at the indicated pace along with your healthcare professional. So I also wanted to give a little shout out to Lindsay. It was really nice to see Lindsay today, and she is just one of the amazing individuals that I've been blessed to be able to work with and mentor in X-linked hypophosphatemia. And so now I'd really like to ask everybody who might be listening in today if they have any questions for any of us, we'd be happy to take them. So it looks like we don't have any questions. We've left you all speechless, I guess. So again, it was really an honor to be able to present to the organization today and to have all of you join us today. And if there are any questions that come up afterwards, please feel free to email myself or Dr. Steigbagel. We'd be happy to get back to you. But thank you very much. Oh, I do. So where do I get the questions? What's the other Zoom? I don't have the other Zoom. So maybe